Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, I've got a great show today. We're going to do a deep dive into an aspect of role-playing game history that is known, but I think it needs to be known more. One, because it was there, quote unquote, at the beginning, and two, it was one of the very first things that TSR published after Dungeons and Dragons. But two, the personality behind it is a fascinating guy. He's not my guest today. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But we do have Bob Alberti.
I'm somewhat less fascinating.
Well, you're pretty fascinating, and I'll tell people how they can learn more about you here in a moment. But yeah, we have Bob Alberti, who actually knows the creator of is it Tékumel? Tékumel.
Let it roll off the tongue.
Tékumel. Okay. Tékumel, also known as the Empire of the Petal Throne, created by Professor M.A.R. Barker. Now, Bob played for years in Professor Barker's game. So, yep. and you're also, if I remember right, you shared that you were is there a foundation or a board?
The Tékumel Foundation, I was the treasurer for 9 years. Yep.
Okay. So I would say, if there's somebody that makes sense to talk about Tékumel and M.A.R. Barker, that Bob qualifies. So I want to give a shout out, and I'll put a link in the show notes. You can always go to shaneplays.com for the show notes. I was introduced to Bob through my friend Matt Barton of Matt Chat, who recently did a Matt Chat with Bob about his work on one of the first, was it the first MMO or one of the first?
It was the first commercial MMORPG back when the O stood for a modem.
Okay, right. Could you play it at 1200 or did you have to have 2400?
No, it was 300.
Wow. See, you and I both know what those numbers mean. I remember when some dude busted out a 9600 baud modem and we were like, what? So that was big stuff. And what was the name of the MMO again?
So the game was called The Scepter of Goth. It was created and written by Alan Kleitz. He had created a game prior to that called Milieu during like 1977, 1978 on a UNIVAC system that was available in Minnesota for high school students to use on the dial-up method. When that state-funded service went away, and I decided to start a company to provide similar services been on that computer. And I reached out to Alan as the logical person to provide the game. And Alan turned out to be a phenomenal genius programmer, and he pretty much wrote all our software.
Nice.
Alan was extraordinarily gifted in that way. And so, we went live in 1983. There is a fellow in England, Professor Richard Bartle of Essex University, and he is basically the historian of online games. He has written several books that you can find online, including Designing Virtual Worlds. And in there, he cites Gamebit as being developed in parallel with his own world. He created a game called Mud 1, along with Roy Trubshaw. Mud 1 was developed independently at the same time in England. They did not charge for it. And so while it's arguable which one was the first Mud, Gamebit was certainly, Scepter of Goth was certainly the first commercial effort at an MMORPG.
Yeah, and I really recommend people listen to Matt's interview with you, Bob. There's so much good stuff in there. Not only is some good technical history, which I think is important to document the progression of computer technology and games and that sort of thing, and Matt does a wonderful job on that, but you also share some pretty interesting anecdotes, like one of your biggest customers would call you up at like 3 a.m. and like, I need to be able to kill this dragon, and you would bleary-eyed program things. So you were there for that. You also were instrumental in the Gopher. Would you call it a protocol?
Internet Gopher is a protocol. It's RFC 1436. And yes, that was the first time that you could search the internet for something without knowing in advance where it was.
So, and that was very important. We take Google and Bing and search engines for granted, but, that was super critically important. So you've been there for a lot of important things, both on the internet side and the role-playing side. So again, folks, check out if that kind of thing interests you. And there's some Tékumel discussion in that episode as well, which is where my ears went bing, and I'm like, I really want to reach out to Bob and see if he would like to come on the show. But the whole thing is fascinating. It hits so many of my sweet spots. So check that out. I'll put that episode in the show notes. What we're here to talk about today is one of the oldest settings, role-playing game settings, that is not only a setting, but it has been multiple different role-playing games.
Right.
In tabletop role-playing game history, the person behind it is often called like the hidden Tolkien or the forgotten Tolkien. Yep. Things that the M.A.R. Barker they need to make a movie about this guy. He's a fascinating guy. For example, I've been doing a little bit of research on him just on medieval history. I was reading a blog where they were talking about the war game tactics for Tékumel. There was a game, Tékumel has war, armies fighting and all that. And somebody was challenging whether M.A.R. Barker got something right with the archery. And the guy was like, I don't know, he had 900 books just on medieval warfare or medieval history, and he referenced somebody who actually shot one of the bows out of a museum. So I mean, it's not the guy. He's deep and he's fascinating, and so Tékumel. I'll share what I know, Bob, which is a little because I stopped myself. I didn't want to over research. I want you to tell me all this great stuff. But Tékumel, if I understand right, M.A.R. Barker worked on Tékumel way before tabletop RPG. He was working on it like in the 40s. Like he was building this really intricate setting, probably wasn't even thought of as a setting at that time, a world. And what's interesting to me, I don't know if it's just a coincidence or if there's something deeper here. Tolkien, of course, developed an incredibly rich world with Middle-earth, of which the books only show a little bit. I mean, he developed it so deep. And he was a linguist. Mm-hmm. And in fact, he was inventing languages, and Middle-earth was like, I want to create a world that uses these languages. M.A.R. Barker is also a linguist and created all of these languages for the world of Tékumel. And do you think that's just a coincidence, or do you think there's something deeper there?
I don't actually. I think it reflects sort of an underlying understanding of linguistics, which is that language reflects the environment. And I think that Barker, needed a place in which his languages could be set. And he loved creating languages. He created many, many different languages for Tékumel. And he was also a polyglot. He could speak any number of languages. He was a published poet in Urdu and Hindi. He could speak Mandarin. He could speak Arabic. He wrote the book, literally, on the Klamath language of the Native Americans of Northwest United States. And that book was used as a reference when they filmed the TV series Northern Exposure.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, they used his Klamath book in order to make sure they got the native tongues right in that show. So he was a world traveler. He lived for many years in India and Pakistan and Afghanistan. He went out in the field. He used to tell about how he wanted to interview the women in an Afghan tribe. And as a male, especially as a foreign male, he was not allowed to look at them. He was not allowed to see them or be around them. And so in order to interview the women, he sat with his back to a tent. The women were in the tent behind him. He faced the men. He would ask the men a question. The men would repeat the question to the women. And then the women would reply and the men would respond.
Wow.
And of course, Barker could understand everything that was being said, but this was in order to not, offend their customers.
That's what I'm saying. If you research Professor Barker, like I said, you could do a movie on him. I mean, or a TV series. He's a fascinating guy, but also he was a powerhouse in not education, which is scholarly. He was a scholarly powerhouse. He was a researcher. He was in the field guy, but luckily for us, he was also a games geek. So so he just happened to be, if I understand right, in Minnesota at the University of Minnesota about the time that D&D and tabletop role-playing games were starting to surface out of.
He had been in Calgary, I believe, college there, and then he relocated to Minneapolis. He was the professor of South and Southeast Asian Studies. More interesting for us is the fact that he was the academic sponsor of the Wargaming Society at the university.
Oh.
If you're going to have a group at the university, there had to be some faculty person who was the sponsor, who kind of kept an eye on it, made sure that kids weren't misbehaving and stuff. And so he was that person. And so people like Gygax and Arneson were part of that group that would come to the university and play role-playing or play wargaming. And through that wargaming, especially doing Tékumel-based war games, that's how Arneson and Gygax learned about Phil's game that he had written his whole life. We found when I was part of the Tékumel Foundation, and we went through his paperwork after his death, we found handwritten comics on lined notebook paper from when he was a child, which had drawn characters in his world whose names are the same as the characters in his novels.
Wow.
So he started when he was 10 or younger.
Yeah, this thing is deep. Yeah, this thing is deep. Yeah. So, and it again, M.A.R. Barker did not copy Tolkien. I'm not trying to implement, but there's a similarity there on how they both went super deep developing their world, and then just happened to make games. And Tolkien didn't make games, but he wrote novels, and they were
both academics and they were both linguists, and that was a very sort of unusual set of coincidences. One of the differences between them is that Tolkien based his world off of the Ring Cycle and Wagner's work. Barker based his world off of Mesoamerican native culture, Southeast Asian culture, and that completely separate portion of the world. And where Tolkien's stuff is very clearly crypto-Christian, right? It has Christian overtones. Barker's is polytheistic. It has 20 gods, and it has a different ethos to it. If you study any of Campbell's writings about the West, he talks about how in East, the East has a hierarchical view of the world, that everything is arranged in a structure, and that the role of man is to play his role, and that's what you do. There's no striving, there's no achieving in that kind of thing. Your goal is to fit in correctly. And so that is reflected in Barker's work as well. In the world of Tékumel, in the nation of Sulianu, which is the primary country in the world, in the game, your goal is to fulfill your social obligations appropriately. And things like striving to advance yourself are considered they're considered impolite.
Yeah, personal glory is
glory.
Anything. Well, and I'll tell you, just playing off of what you just said, there's 5 novels that M.A.R. Barker wrote. The first one, if I understand right, is The Man of Gold. Yes. And I just started reading that. And the introduction, the very first chapter, hits all those notes.
Yep.
The main character is a monk basically, or whatever of a religious order, and the religious order demonstrates everything you just said, the hierarchy and this and that, and they acknowledge that there's other deities, and there's a lot of there's none of the I'm a young boy who's about to discover my destiny. It's all very organized, and that doesn't mean it's boring. But it's very organized and a very clear social structure. And M.A.R. Barker does an amazing job of introducing the feel of the world of Tékumel with that monastery being a microcosm. It was very interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's I've done Tékumel games at conventions. I've run Tékumel games, and part of the way I try to introduce players to the world is I will set a very simple kind of murder mystery in a single clan house, and they will all be members of that clan house, and they will be trying to sort out what happened in this small mystery. But the point of keeping it limited in that way, just as with the monastery, is to take this sprawling, overwhelming culture and try to present it in sort of edible chunks, so you can wrap your head around the differences, which are important.
Yeah, there's a description in the book. There's this huge area where a lot of administrative tasks are done, and there's all these different platforms at different levels with interlinking paths, and it's all very important. Nothing is on accident. It's all by design. So very interesting.
The visual representation of status is extremely important in Tékumel. Some cultures wear badges that show exactly who they are and what they do. The Libyani are another nation, and they actually tattoo on their face everything about who and what they are in a sort of a symbolic language. And so you can look at a Libyani and you can basically say, okay, this is a person who is an administrator in this temple, and they're part of this clan, and you can tell everything just by looking at the tattoos on their face.
Right. Yeah, it's very important. So, and like you said, that's not just he's not just drawing from Eastern. He's drawing from what are the other cultures that he's drawing from?
Mesoamerica, the Aztec, the Inca, the Maya.
Right. So it's not just, I don't want people to think that he just took and modeled it after, some Chinese dynasty or something like that. It's much more layered and rich than that. So
and then piled on top of that is the history of the world. The planet of Tékumel was a science fiction-y resort planet thousands and thousands of years ago, and then it was somehow sucked into its own pocket dimension where there's just one solar system, and that's it. And at that point, all of the technology stopped working, and a lot of things we'd call magic started working. And in order to survive, everything changed, everything collapsed, and then rose up again. And so you have this primitive culture, a culture that is, using draft animals to pull carts around and things like that. But it's built on top of the ruins of a highly technological culture. And so you have that mix of magic, fantasy, and science fiction all smashed together.
Wow. Yeah. And then with that rich social structure. Yep. So it sounds really fascinating. I've heard about it for years. Most people that research tabletop RPG history are going to run across the Empire of the Petal Throne, which the Empire, the Petal Throne, that empire is not all of Tékumel. It's just one of the main empires, right?
That's the longer sort of flowery name for Tsolyanu, which is the protagonist nation. Okay. And then Tsolyanu is surrounded by Muglavya, Libyanu, Milamaniya, Yankor, and Haida Pakalani and others all around them. So there's actually a globe that Barker drew, right, and drew all the things. And I've gone through actually, and not only kind of calculated more information about the globe, but I've also mapped the solar system of Tékumel. where the planets orbit relative to where solar orbits are, etc. So,
yeah, and you've already mentioned that these planets, the solar system of the setting, kind of went into a pocket dimension, and there's no stars. The only heavenly bodies you see are like the other planets and whatnot. So,
a pocket dimension is called a Baythorm, and the reason I mention that is because the current set of rules for Tékumel by Jeff D are called Baythorm. So if you want to play Tékumel, you can look up Jeff D's Baythorm and download, purchase that, and start playing.
And I love Jeff D and his partner Amanda and the games they do. I'm a huge Village Vigilantes nerd, so and through that I've explored more what he's doing, and I saw that he was doing Tékumel. So now, did you have any interaction with Jeff D, or did he interact with the Foundation while he was coming out? How were you involved at all with the rules he came up with?
I wasn't involved in their creation or testing.
Right.
I was just the treasurer of the Foundation. He did work closely with the Foundation on licensing and on content to make sure it had the look and feel of Tékumel. It was a very good job that Foundation did bringing that out and helping make that set of rules possible.
Well, I met Jeff a couple of years ago at North Texas RPG Con, and he was telling me about Tékumel. It was probably one of the first times I ever met somebody who had played it or loved it. And boy, his eyes just lit up. He's like, you got to read the books, and you got to do this, and you got to do that, and da-da-da. So he's a true fan.
Yep.
Jeff's a true fan. So, and since rules and settings have come up, we'll go ahead and address that. There's been several over the years. When you were playing, because you sat at M.A.R. Barker's table, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Was he using any specific system, or just doing his own thing, or what was going on there?
So there have been rules created for Tékumel basically every decade since the beginning. Empire of the Petal Throne, Swords and Sorcery, Guardians of Order, I'm forgetting one, and then Baythorm. And we didn't use any of them.
The other one was Gardasil Adventures on Tékumel. Yeah.
Right.
Theater of the Mind Enterprises. Okay, yeah.
Yep. And we didn't use any of those. So those rules existed. We didn't use those. If you look around on the internet, you can find what's called the Thursday Night Rules. And that was written up, I think, by my friend Keith DeLune. And it was a very, very simple set of rules. We would talk through a game, and then if we were trying to do something rash, we would say, Phil, I'm going to try to do a thing. And he'd say, roll your dice. And if the dice were low, 01 being the best, then you succeeded. And if the dice were high, 99 or 100 being the worst, then you failed disastrously. And that was pretty much what we did for rules.
Okay.
I think we used spells out of Swords and Glory, but we didn't really worry about range or effect or stuff like that. If you wanted to cast Missiles of Metallica, you cast Missiles of Metallica, and you either hit and damaged or you didn't hit or whatever. We were very, very casual. It was much more about the gaming and the fun than it was about rules.
So that kind of brings up another question I had. What like D&D uses, although it's iterated over the years. When D&D first came out, and for a long time, and still to a certain extent, it uses what's referred to as a Vancian magic system, whereas from Jack Vance, The Dying Earth, etc., where you memorize a certain amount of spells, you cast them, you forget them, you rememorize them, da-da-da. What kind of magical style or feel does Tékumel have?
Tékumel has two styles of magic and a variety of different forms that it takes. All magic users on Tékumel are basically what you would call clerics.
Okay.
Because there are no atheists on Tékumel. Because the gods on Tékumel are actual creatures of some sort, very powerful, that occasionally show up and make themselves known, there is no doubt about the gods. So there are 20 gods that the Sulyani worship. Other countries worship the same beings, but name them differently, conflate a couple together, whatever. the Soyani worship the Angsfanyali gods. There's 20 of them. They're divided into change and stability. So unlike a lot of games that have good and evil, the divisions in Tékumel are change and stability, progress and conservatism. And there's no inherent evil. There isn't a god who is evil. There are gods.
Is it considered if you just kill somebody in cold blood, is that considered an evil act? Or I'm not talking about the cosmology of the deities,
right.
but I'm just talking about the personal morality. There?
No, it's considered wrong.
Okay.
Right? If you kill somebody in cold blood, it's just considered, what'd you do that for, you idiot? And I think that reflects the fact that, societies have their standards, and you don't just go and murder people in most societies. You can call that evil, and you can also just call that wildly impolite, and it's essentially the same thing. Instead, what you have is these 5 gods of stability, 5 gods of change, and then each of them have sort of an associate junior god who emphasizes one element of their worship, and those are the cohorts. So there's 5 gods of each pantheon, and then 5 cohorts. All of them have independent magic spells. So there's Vamukla has the flame spell, and Avante has a spell to cause gardens to grow, and Dilanala has spells to seduce people, and Sarku has spells to bring people back from the dead. So the magic system has psychic and ritual spells within it. Any given spell you cast might be psychic. In other words, you think hard about it, spell happens. Or it might be ritual. You have to wave your hands around, chant certain words, light some stuff on fire, and then the spell happens. And then there's a third form of magic, which is actually technology, which is that you can find things that are called eyes. They're small spherical things that can fit between your fingers. And these are devices that do spells. So you push the button on an eye, and fire shoots out of it, or you freeze something in time, or you make someone calm who was upset, or you bring them back to life.
So the new M.A.R game and setting from Monty Cook, its conceit is that major amazing civilizations have risen and fallen 9 times, or 8 times, and now you're in the 9th world. Right. And the new M.A.R are actually, you're constantly finding magical devices that are really technology. It's like expected that you're constantly finding this stuff. Now, in Tékumel, is it extremely rare to find bits of previous technology, or is it, how rare is it to do that?
There's real Tékumel.
Yeah.
And then there's game Tékumel. All right? If you're an actual schlub in Tékumel, if you're a clerk who goes to the Palace of the Realm and writes up scrolls every day, you'll go your whole life, you'll never see a magic object, all right?
Okay.
But if you're some Yahoo from Sheboygan who's playing Tékumel, your character is certainly going to stumble across all sorts of magical items.
I gotcha.
As to the sort of the tastes of the DM. But there are things that you do frequently find. One of them are tubeway cars. There's a mass transit system built into the planet that still exists. And so if you go down into the dungeons and you fight the monsters, you will frequently stumble across a room in which there is a sphere hovering in the air. And as you approach it, a door opens up. And if you climb into that, door shuts, you push a button on the console. 15 hours later, you have to pee and you're really thirsty, but the door opens up and you're on the other side of the planet.
Okay. All right. So there, I got it. But for the most part, I mean, does Tékumel, it doesn't feel like a science fiction setting for the most part, or does it?
Well, it can.
It can, depending on the, okay.
It depends on your adventure. We got it. There were different kinds of Tékumel. When we were playing, if you read Man of Gold and then the next book is Flame Song, it at the time in the 70s foreshadowed all sorts of events on Tékumel. All right, we gamed across those events actually playing out, which was great because with all the warnings and the foreshadowings that the book gave us, we completely missed all of them and were completely blindsided by every event anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you're as close to the source as you can get. You still missed it. That's great.
Yeah, so what happened when we were gaming was that Prince Dishane overthrew his father and seized control of the empire. And he was a prince of the undead, of Sarku. And so that led to certain gnarly ramifications for our characters. So we had different games, right? We had a very political game where we hung around the capital and tried to vie for power and find allies in unseating Dishane. We had a game where we went off onto another universe to rescue one of the Dishane's brothers who had been stranded there and bring him back to be a candidate for emperor. We had a game where we ended up out in the cosmos dealing with the gods, and we had a game where we ended up talking with a mad computer that ran a town on the opposite side of the planet. All those games are possible. Intrigue, fantasy, swords and sorcery, robots and computers and nuclear missiles, they're all there.
Wow. Okay, I didn't realize with the research I'd done so far, I envisioned it mainly, and I'm bringing this up not for any sort of controversy, just because a lot of the reference that people will have for Empire of the Petal Throne is in the Rift War cycle by Feist, Raymond D. Feist. There was an invasion into the Midkemia D&D type world from a world that in some respects is similar to Tékumel. Now, according to Raymond E. Feist, he said, I wasn't intentionally trying to steal from Tékumel. What happened was our DM way back in the day in our Midkemia campaign had Tékumel invade. But I didn't realize that was other IP, you know. So there's a but the universe that invades Midkemia is, it sounds like it's just the Petal Throne part of Tékumel. It's very, you know, there's houses and clans and there's practically a Petal Throne and all that. But what you're telling me, so if most people are thinking, well, Tékumel is just I think it's Belaya. I'm trying to think of the Kelawon was the empire in the Rift War saga. It's not just Kelawon. It sounds to me like Tékumel is way beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. In Feist's world, they're called the Surani rather than the Sulyani. Their neighbors to the north are the Yonkora rather than Yonkor. So it's quite clearly the same.
Right.
For all that he protests that it was inadvertent, he has had several years to put an acknowledgement of that fact into his frontispiece of his books, and he never has done.
He never has. Yeah. See, I don't know all the background there.
There was a lot of bad blood.
Yeah. All I know is supposedly he claims that it was, and I wasn't trying to bring up controversy. I was just a lot of people they search.
Remember CompuServe?
I do.
Okay, so we're going back around again to this old
to the back,
computer stuff. I got into very heated arguments with Feist in the
Did you? Okay.
CompuServe about this before I was gaming with Barker.
Wow. Okay.
What ties this all together, if we come back around to Gamebit, is that I designed the world for Scepter of Goth, right? Alan Cleats wrote the software, but I designed the city and the countryside and the monsters and then the weapons and the little adventures and stuff like that. I was the guy who did the game database. My company, Gamebit, we hired a programmer to help us with software because I was busy doing that. Alan was busy doing other things. And so we needed another programmer. The guy we hired copied our software and attempted to sell it. And then when we caught him doing that in our own chat room, we fired him. He took our copy of software and set up a competing company in town with us, all right, and ripped off everything. He just ripped everything off from us. There weren't laws back then that could concisely address what he'd done because...
It's like, what is property, right, when it comes to programming? Yeah, all that stuff, right? Yeah, right.
So I was very annoyed at having been ripped off that way. And I also worked at the University of Minnesota, so I would see Barker occasionally. And I knew that Barker had likewise been ripped off in this issue with Feist. And so on occasion, I would say to him, hi, I just happen to know about this situation. And yeah, it really sucks having your IP ripped off, doesn't it? And that was kind of how we first got acquainted.
Interesting. I was going to ask, how did you end up in his circle? So let me back up for a couple of things here. One, I wasn't bringing it up for controversy. However, anything you want to share on your perspective on what happened, feel free. Yeah. I don't want to push a guest into controversy, but if a guest is like, I have strong feelings, feel free to share. Second thing is, how did Professor Barker feel about it? Was he upset about it, or?
Oh, very upset about it his whole life. When I got ripped off, the other partners in my business were not willing to sue. They were not willing to take any legal action because they felt that we were overstretched enough anyway. It's not like we had a lot of money. And what were we going to get out of him if we were successful? So they didn't want to take action. When Barker got ripped off, he approached Don Wollheim, Daw, who had published his novels, and said, this is a clear, breach of copyright. You should do something about it. But Barker's novels hadn't really sold enough to make it worth Daw's time to sue Feist over it. So both Barker and I shared that irritation of having been ripped off and not being able to do anything about it.
So what is your perspective?
My perspective is that Feist probably is completely honest about the fact that he didn't realize he was ripping off Barker, and that doesn't matter. Once he had discovered he was doing so, he needed to do something about it.
He should acknowledge it.
He should have at least acknowledged it. He never did. He was very defensive. He was very rude, and so frankly, that guy can go kick rocks as far as.
Wow. Okay. Well, I all I know is that. I was researching, and of course the connections came up. Yeah. And then, of course, when I read the Rift War saga, a lot of people read Feist in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I guess someone in the 90s. But he was the Rift War saga was a major book series. Yep. And, that Kellewan was very exotic and fascinating. And that was a major part of what made the books interesting. So, yeah, I agree. He could at least say, hey, it's come to light that and give credit where credit's due. And that sort of thing. So I agree with you on that. The other thing that's fascinating to me about the Rift War saga and Kellewan and Tékumel, and also, everyone loves Drizzt Do'Urden books from the Forgotten Realms. They're like, Drizzt, blah, blah, blah. My favorite Drizzt book from when I was in high school in the 80s was Homeland, where it told the story of all of these competing clan houses in Menzoberranzan scheming against each other in a very long game sort of way. Mm-hmm. And politics usually doesn't fascinate me in a tabletop role-playing game, but that really subtle maneuvering of all of these clan houses against each other in a way that is both open and like everybody knows it's going on, but nobody admits it. And it's fascinating to me, and at least the Empire of the Petal. I don't know of all of Tékumel, but the Empire of the Petal Throne is rife with that. I mean, right. So, can you expand a little bit on that, on how the politics of that?
Sure.
Yeah.
While we're mentioning other things to look at, I'll mention Donald Kingsbury's Courtship Rights, which I believe is a novel that may have had some influence from Tékumel, but is solidly his own creation.
Okay.
However, it's a very well done story. It feels a lot like Silyanu, so it's a fun read as well. But we had a lot of intrigue. We had intra-party intrigue in that way. My character, Arjahi Vaisaner, was a priest of Kasarl, who's the priest of secrets. And so I was constantly at odds with the rest of my group because I had to maintain an external face that I was cooperating and helping. And yet at the same time, I was constantly working for my temple and for my own interests. And that's how they should also have been behaving too, and probably were. So, for example, one time we went off and we had this rich adventure, and we came back with a treasure trove of stuff. And I sent notice on ahead to my temple. And so when we arrived to a grand celebration. Everyone was so excited about all that we'd accomplished. We were treated like celebrities and everything like that. But that was all my temple. It was all set up so that they could then take all of the treasure and keep it to themselves. And meanwhile, my teammates are like, yeah, everyone
This is great.
Yeah, we're great. And meanwhile, we're in the hold of the ship hauling out the treasure. So there was a lot of that kind of intrigue that went on. That goes on all over the place in Tékumel. A lot of that kind of stuff.
All right, so I'm gonna take a quick break and do some show notes, and we'll be right back. But what I want to do before then is I want to let people know about this. Another thing that Matt Barton brought out when y'all were talking that just fascinates me is this vilification tennis that you're a part of. So tell us a little bit about that, and then I think you have an upcoming event of vilification tennis, and then I'll take us to some show notes, and then we'll be right back.
All right. Vilification tennis began over 30 years ago at the Minnesota Renaissance Festival, and it's insult comedy. It's called tennis because we have two pairs of people who insult each other back and forth like a tennis game, and a judge who scores it. And we insult each other for your entertainment. That's what we do. And when COVID came along, we had been performing at the Bryant Lake Bowl in Minneapolis. Now we perform online. And this is all relevant because your listeners can tune in on Friday, November 27th, and I'll be part of Vilification Tennis Works from Home, which is our November show. I'll also be part of our F2020 show.
I'm sorry.
Exactly. We have one on New Year's Eve and one on New Year's Day with separate casts for each one. And so I'll be a part of the New Year's Day show. So.
Fun. So it's creative insults. It's like, like Blackadder insults. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And we have brackets. We have one round at the beginning and one round at the end. And then in between we have improv comedy structures.
Fun. That's too much fun. So send me the links for that and I'll put it in the show notes. But is there a website or a YouTube channel or something you can direct people to?
Vilificationtennis.com.
Yeah.
Everyone knows how to spell vilification, so I don't spell that out. Tennis is TENNIS. Run all those letters together and put a .com at the end, and you find our website.
And there you go.
Or it shows on YouTube if you want to see some of our past shows.
I mean, I love creative insult comedy. You know, I got into this thing with a friend of mine. We used to come up with fake insults. Mm-hmm. And my favorite that's always stuck with me is, and it means nothing, but I love saying it, is "thou paltritudinous hipsatch." So it means nothing, but it sounds fun to say.
Well, for example, there's Victor Raymond, who's the president of the Tékumel Foundation, and who's another player in Barker's game, who I've known for years. And I can't stand Victor because he reminds me of math, and I hate math. and the way Victor reminds me of math is that he's a square. His friends are imaginary. His jokes are derivative. And can he make them funny? Of course he can't.
See, I love that. I'm probably going to check this stuff out. Although I think I remember you giving out a warning that it can be a little.
It's very blue.
Blue. It's blue.
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
If you are offended, then we will offend you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So warning issued. So. All right, I'm going to take us to some show notes, and then we will be back. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the professor and his game and how you ended up there and that sort of thing. So, hey, everybody, let's do some show notes. All right, first of all, always love to hear your feedback. You can tweet me at ShanePlays, ShanePlays, or you can email me at shane@shaneplays.com. Speaking of shaneplays.com, the show notes for each episode are always posted there, so if you want to know more about today's topic, just click right on over there and learn you some more. For example, our previous show is up on the blog, and that was episode 231, which was the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon fan-created final episode, and that is a really good discussion. The two guys that created that final episode of Dungeons & Dragons based on a script that had been written but never produced. Just really good stuff. I recommend you check it out if you haven't already. Shane Plays Geek Talk can be found in many places, including on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, YouTube, and more. And we're also carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. Krypton radio.com. A couple of ways that you can support Shane Plays Geek Talk if you're so inclined. One, of course, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/Shane Plays, and you can support for as little as $1 an episode. And I also post a lot of links, affiliate links like Humble Bundle, that sort of thing on my Twitter accounts, which I'll talk about more here in a second, and also on the Facebook page. There is a Shane Plays Facebook page where I put fun stuff out there and affiliate links and that sort of thing. You can get cool stuff, save money, put a little money in my pocket. I often post software, comic books, ebooks, role-playing games, all kinds of stuff from Humble Bundle and other affiliate links that you can check out. And, like I said, if you buy it through one of my links, then I make a little money off that, and I appreciate it. So I have 2 Twitter accounts, which I mention every episode. One is Shane Plays, ShanePlays, and that is where I just tweet all the time, just whatever. It's much more of a personal Twitter account, and if you want to just hear everything that comes across my fevered little brain, check that one out. If you just want the meat and potatoes, the basic announcements, then follow Shane Plays PR, ShanePlays PR. Both of them, I share like the affiliate links and cool stuff like that. And last but never least, I always want to give a shout out to advertising partner Cursova Magazine, Cirsova, Cursova Magazine. And it's a magazine of thrilling adventure and daring suspense. If you like to check out the best from exciting new writers, but also love the pulp fiction of yore, then this is the magazine for you. All right, that's it for the show notes for this time, and we will get back to our discussion with Bob Alberti on Tékumel and Professor M.A.R. Barker. And we're back on Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm joined by Bob Alberti, and we are talking about Tékumel and Professor M.A.R. Barker. And it's so fascinating. We're, no matter how much we talk today, I feel like we're just going to scrape the surface. But one of the things I like to do with Shane Plays Geek Talk is my favorite feedback, Bob, for this podcast is when somebody contacts me and said, I didn't know anything about that topic, but now it's interesting to me and I want to know more. And so this is very much one of those shows. It is an important part of tabletop RPG history that people either don't know about or know just a little. They think they know something, but they really don't, because it goes so much deeper than that. We established earlier in the show that, Professor Barker, magnificent mind, really incredible academic, both at the campus and in the field, multilingual linguist, built rich worlds, is considered the authority on, languages, and has been published in different languages for poetry and that sort of thing. So he went deep. Mm-hmm. One thing I noticed in the research I did, and also earlier, you were referring to him as Phil, and he was born Philip Barker.
Right.
M.A.R. Barker. He converted evidently to Islam at one point, and the M.A.R. comes from Muhammad Abd al-Rahman Barker, if I understand correctly, which I love, the M.A.R. Barker and J.R.R. Tolkien. It just feels so, has a mystique to it. Yep. But I mean, do most people refer to him as Phil if you knew him, or, okay. All right.
Knew him, he's basically called.
But he evidently, legitimately was impressed with Islam and genuinely converted.
He was a faithful Muslim, and he was buried in Islamic tradition.
Yep. Right. Yeah, he said that not only did that religion make sense to him, he was at the Taj Mahal, and he heard the names of God being spoken out, and it was an incredibly moving experience for him. So that's where the M.A.R. Barker comes from, but also sometimes you'll hear people say Phil. You, interestingly enough, and I'm glad I brought it up now, the Raymond E. Feist thing, that your annoyance with that and having been ripped off by a software programmer led you to talk to him, which built the relationship. So how did that go, and at what point were you invited into his table and all of that?
I had approached him on the street at the University of Minnesota, and we'd had a couple of very casual discussions, but I don't think he knew who I was. However, I had that Gamebit game that I was running at the time, So I had a number of customers who were gamers, and one of them, Joe Zatola, was a member of Phil Barker's game already. So Joe talked to Victor Raymond, who was also in the game, and the two of them kind of interviewed me and then introduced me to the game in around 1987.
So you were like, they checked you out before bringing you into the table.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. All right.
I gamed with Professor Barker for 22 years, and I'm on kind of the low side of the length of time that people gamed with Professor Barker.
Wow.
Victor has gamed with Barker since, I believe, the late 70s, so possibly something on the order of 30 years. I'm not sure. People who gamed with Barker gamed with him for a very long time, and so you had to be considered someone who they could deal.
Right. Yeah, it's just like a job interview. You can have the right skills, but if the chemistry's not there, it can throw things off or whatever. Yeah. So what kind of man was he? I get no sense when I research, like, was he warm and joking all the time? What kind of man was he?
I think the word irascible was coined for him.
Okay.
He could be a very cranky fellow, and he could also be very warm. He was very generous. We had many, many dinners at his home. His wife, Umberine, was a very lovely lady. She's still out in California right now. She could cook like nobody's business. So, we'd go over there at least a couple times a year and have, a authentic Pakistani dinner at his dining room table. He had a house that was full of all sorts of amazing knickknacks. He had a suit of armor in the dining room next to the dining room table. There were, Hindu knives and swords and daggers along the walls. His fireplace was bracketed by two German greatswords, Zweihanders. So he was very much out of central casting. He was very much the academic and sort of the irascible old professor whose imagination provided all sorts of amazing games, and he was phenomenal to game with. I mean, over the top, hard to believe kinds of things that he would accomplish. One thing I talk about is how early on in the game I had an NPC named Kagor, who was a slave, a servant who worked for me. Only it turned out he wasn't. He was actually a leader in my temple traveling incognito. And so eventually this is revealed. I go off. I have other adventures. Years go by. At some point, I'm in a crowd, and I spot the back of somebody's head that looks familiar. And I'm like, is that Kagor? And Kagor turns around, and it's him. And I haven't seen him for 10 years. And he's able to fill me in on everything he's been doing in the meantime. And this was all in Barker's head all the time. He had the whole world, thousands of characters in his head all the time.
Well, that's again, to draw that comparison to the way that Tolkien did things and Professor Barker. I read that evidently, Barker had thousands of manuscript pages on just all kinds of aspects of Tékumel. So everything that happens, it sounds like, in one of his games or one of his books, or the same way with Tolkien, you're only seeing 0.01% of everything that's under the surface there, right, which is why everything feels so rich and real.
Well, and that's why we can have the novels to clue us in and still be blindsided by events because we were deep in the shag of the carpet and we couldn't see the pattern,
So it sounds like that at least at times he opened up his personal life to his gaming group, having you do his home. Mm-hmm. Did you feel like you were friends with him, or did you feel like he was your DM?
Oh, no, he was a friend. He was a friend. Yeah.
And is there, I can't imagine people would game together that long and not relationships at the table build strongly. So I'm guessing the players have fairly strong relationships. Are you still in touch with a lot of them?
We're still in touch. I mean, when Phil was getting old, and it was clear he was coming towards the end of his life, he formed the Tékumel Foundation. I believe his wife is still the chair of it officially. It was the IP inheritor, the literary executor of Phil's Tekkumel-related information. Those of us who are on the board initially, at that point, and we were all friends, and it was all a labor of love to put all this stuff together and get it cleaned up and ready to go. One of the things that Phil did is that he was very casual with his IP in the 70s. And so, for example, somebody could call him up, and people did. They would call him up and say, "Hey, Professor Barker, I'm a big fan. I love Tékumel." And then they'd say, "I was thinking of coming out with a line of Tékumel lunchboxes," right? Or whatever.
Yeah, whatever, right.
And Phil would say, "That sounds great. Have fun." He didn't realize he was giving an indefinite license to produce for no compensation to this person. And years later, when he passed away, the foundation's job is to go through, find all those people, right? Send them $1 and a contract that says, in exchange for this consideration, I release all claims and holds upon the IP regarding Tékumel lunchboxes. And in order to produce things for Tékumel, we had to clean that up. Otherwise, if someone else came up with a Tékumel lunchbox, we could get sued.
Right.
So a lot of what the foundation did in its early years was that kind of paperwork and that kind of expensive, legal, slow process of cleaning up the rights to Tékumel.
That's good that not only that he established that foundation, but after he was gone, that people still took it seriously and treated it.
I have to credit Victor Raymond, because he had seen what had happened to the IP of other authors, Michael Moorcock and other people who had passed away, and their IP had gone every which way but good. It had gone into receivership. Somebody bought it for $1 at an auction. That was the kind of thing we were trying to avoid having happen with Tékumel. If
you're foresighted and you have good people, you can protect that IP. I know it sounds like the Tékumel Foundation's doing a great job. I have a buddy who has written the only officially, I don't know, he was able to finish a Tarzan story that Edgar Rice Burroughs started because he's got a strong relationship with the Edgar Rice Burroughs Foundation. And of course the Tolkien, Christopher Tolkien was very, very good at protecting J.R.R. Tolkien stuff. So, people, it's, you think that like, people will treat this right because they love the IP. No, they won't. I mean, there are, even if they have good intentions, they could still accidentally run something into the ground. So, yeah. And you were the treasurer for how long?
9 years.
9 years. So if I, and I'm speaking as the, hypothetically, so if I wanted to, hey, I want to do a Tékumel comic book, then those people would need to approach the foundation.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And what they would need to bring to the foundation is a solid business plan. And this is what a lot of people don't understand.
Not just this is cool, but...
Right. 9 out of 10 people who approach anybody with an idea like that, it never gets past the idea stage.
Right.
Somebody like Jeff D., who's a professional who knows what he's doing, he comes to the foundation with a business plan. And that's what you need to approach with. If you have a solid plan for producing something and maintaining it and turning out quality, then things will move forward. If you're just fly by night, then they won't. And so...
Fair enough. Yeah. No, Jeff and his people, they've been doing role. I mean, Jeff was part of the original, like, basic D&D. He's been there. So, and I'm really intrigued. I was already intrigued by Tékumel, but I'm even more intrigued now with your descriptions of how much more there is to it. I had no idea. I saw it as just sort of the Petal Throne stuff. So I guess let's finish on this. Why, given that the makeup of Tékumel and the motivations of Tékumel, because the typical D&D, not all D&D games, but the typical D&D game is sort of a Western European, let's go slay stuff and get gold and get renowned and get glory. Right. Okay. Tékumel is not like that. So what are the adventure hooks in Tékumel? What gets somebody adventuring in Tékumel?
Well, it's funny because, when we initially started gaming in Tékumel, someone would approach us and say, I have a wealthy patron, and he's looking for some people to go retrieve something from the underworld, and he'll pay you some gold to go get it. And we'd go down in the underworld, and stuff would happen. After we'd been gaming in Tékumel for 20 years, someone would approach us, and they'd say, I have a wealthy patron, and he would like to pay you to go into the underworld. And we'd go, ho, 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 hold up there.
Yeah.
He wants us to go into the underworld. Yeah. No. But he's going to pay you a lot of money. No, we're not going into the underworld. And that was when we realized we'd role-played it right into reality. Because anyone in their right mind would look at that and go, I'm not going down there with them and get eaten. So the patron can get a statue of Dilanala for a ceremony. No.
Right.
Go ask the club.
Yeah.
So, we had other things on our mind. We had a whole set of adventures with a whole set of separate characters in which all we did was try to reclaim a valley that had once been settled and then had been allowed to lapse back into the wild. So we settled the valley of Kashkamai and discovered all sorts of secrets about it. And that was our whole adventure for years, was just, figuring out this ancient valley. We had a number of adventures where we simply endeavored to expand the map of Tékumel. And so we sailed over the pole to get around to the other side of the planet and then mapped out the planet and various things over there. The opposite side of the planet is dominated by Hukun and their sort of client species, the Chima. Guys run everything over there. Some humans, but they are the dominant species on the other side of the planet. It's the semi-transparent Hukun and the annoying little Chima who basically run the show on the other side of the planet.
Right. That brings up, there's a variety. You're not just humans.
Right.
They introduced right off, we referred to that novel, The Man of Gold. Mm-hmm. Who I believe the protagonist is going to be anyway, everything's from his point of view so far, was fostered by insect people for 13 years.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's, and I assume that there's different playable races besides humans. You
can play a Peichoi, a Swamp Folk, a Tinalia, a Hlutvergu. You could play a Shen. There's all sorts of other sentient races on the planet. And when you think about it, that really alters the psychology of humans on the planet.
Because they're not on top of the food chain.
Right. We're on top of the food chain. We're everything, right? On Tékumel, you are just one of a bunch of sentient species. There are creatures that are bigger than you. There are creatures that are lower than you. And you're in the middle someplace. And that's a completely different way of looking at the world than walking around Earth today going, I'm the alpha predator.
Right. Now that does make a difference. Speaking of the planet, does the cosmology or does the makeup of the planet seem to make sense? Or is it just like a bunch of, because Barker is an amazing linguist, fascinating academic, but maybe not a good geologist. I don't know. How does the planet work?
The planet is basically a very large starship.
Huh?
The planet has engines.
Well, now I read that it was larger. It's like 2 3/4 times larger than the Earth or something like that. It's
larger than Earth, and it orbits in exactly the same time period as Earth does. And a lot of people spent a lot of time trying to figure out how this could be physically possible using orbital mechanics. And then one day on one of our adventures, we discovered the planet isn't orbiting, it's flying.
Wow. Yeah, so there's so much, this setting is so much deeper.
The great ancients customized this planet to within an inch of their life. They dimmed the star down. It's still brighter than the sun, but they dimmed the star, and they also made the planet so it exactly matches Earth's orbit and rotation.
Interesting.
So, yeah, that was a big reveal for me. I was used to being gobsmacked by Barker, but I was gobsmacked when I realized that the planet is not orbiting, it's flying.
It's flying around the dimmed sun. So, all right. Well, if what we've talked about so far isn't enough to tease people with the interest and exotic nature of Tékumel, I don't know what would. But let's say somebody's interested. Mm-hmm. They want to either learn more about Tékumel or they want to play in Tékumel, but they want to get their head around what Tékumel is before they jump in. What starting point do you recommend?
So right now I would say start with Baythorn. It's the current set of rules. It's very well written. I have a book I wrote with Barker called Mitlanyal, which is the 20 gods of Tékumel explained. The reason I wrote this book is because when you'd start a game of Tékumel, they'd say, well, you have to worship somebody. Who do you worship? People.
I don't, what? Who?
Like, there's 20 gods. Is there a god of swords? And you'd say, yeah, Vamukla. Okay, I'm going to worship Vamukla. And everybody ends up worshiping Vamukla.
Right.
So Mitlanyal explains in very encyclopedic fashion and brief paragraphs, like, this is Hru, and he is the god of change, and this is what he stands for, and if you worship him, this is what you'll be doing. And so that's what Mitlanyal is. So if you can get a copy of Mitlanyal, it's out of print. You could always tell the Tékumel Foundation you'd like them to put it back in print, and that's a good place to start, like, designing your character.
Well, I saw some stuff on Drive-Thru RPG.
Yep,
that was some of M.A.R. Barker's writing.
That's where the foundation publishes all the Tékumel related stuff. There's also Facebook groups. You can join the Facebook groups and start talking to people. I'd recommend that.
Do you recommend the novels or any of the novels in particular?
Well, certainly Man of Gold, but at this point, when you're approaching the novels, you have to realize that you're approaching novels written in a completely different generational style.
Right.
Barker has a very deep vocabulary, and he was influenced by, Vance and
right.
Fritz Lieber and stuff. And so, some people find his novels impenetrable from that stylistic point of view. If you can read them, certainly read them. Man of Gold and Flamesong in particular will give you a good tour of the world and a sense of, what it's about.
Right.
If you can find Mitlanyal in a used bookstore or something, I ended each god's chapter with a short fictional story, so you get to see different worlds, different looks at the world in each of those chapter stories.
So are these days, do you ever get to play in Tékumel anymore? Do you do one-shots or anything? Or
I had to stop being the treasurer, and I don't really get to play too much anymore because I'm ridiculously busy.
Right, all right.
So it's unfortunate, but I'm doing comedy, I'm doing photography, I've done some archaeology. I'm just kind of keeping.
Yeah, we can't really go into it here, but you sent me that PowerPoint that had your visit to Cyprus, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that was fascinating. The tombs in between the houses, tomb, house, yeah, and that spider. Forget it. Yeah. I'm done.
No.
Yeah, spider was huge.
I was told it was a harmless huntsman spider. I don't care.
Yeah, I don't care. Kill it now. Well, don't, or at least get me away from it. So, all right. Well, Bob, fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. I suspected that I was going to learn some stuff today that would intrigue me even more, and it did. So thank you for taking the time to help me learn more and to share more with my listeners about Tékumel, but also, Professor Barker sounds like a fascinating guy. So
he's a very fascinating man.
Yeah, I would have liked to have met him. So, all right. Well, good luck with your vilification tennis coming up on, was it November 27th? Yeah, November 27th. And then also you're doing the F2020 on New Year's Day. So, vilificationtennis.com. Right. All right. Folks, again, we were talking about Tékumel, which is one of the oldest published settings for tabletop RPGs.
First published setting.
The first published setting, period, had been being worked on since the 40s and is still going on today in different versions of games and that kind of thing. So check it out and do yourself a favor and research M.A.R. Barker a little some. He's a fascinating guy. All right, Bob. Well, thanks again for your time. I hope you have a great day and I hope at some point in your busy future you get to travel back to Tékumel. It's maybe even just for a short visit. So
love to do a game or two.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/Shane Plays.